You know those afternoons where everything feels normal? Like life is on autopilot. Steady, predictable, nothing out of the ordinary? That's exactly what I thought this was going to be. The sunlight was spilling in through the living room. Curtains, warm and soft, cutting into long stripes across the carpet.
Outside.
I could hear the faint rumble of a motorbike somewhere down the street, and the occasional bark of the neighbor's dog. The air had that quiet hum you only get on lazy weekends, where even time feels like it's moving slower. I was sitting on the couch, half listening to a podcast, half scrolling through my phone. The kind of mindless browsing where you're not really absorbing anything, just letting your thumb do the work. From the kitchen came the gentle clink of cups and the soft hiss of the kettle. My wife was making tea. She always made it the same way, strong, with just a touch of sugar. Could already smell it drifting in. That earthy aroma that somehow always felt like a hug. Except today, something was different. The scent wasn't. The same, it was still tea. But there was another note underneath. Faint, but there. Something sharp. Almost metallic. If bitterness had a smell, this was it. I remember pausing mid-scroll, tilting my head slightly, and sniffing the air like some kind of suspicious bloodhound. My first thought was, maybe she used a different brand. Maybe she added ginger. She knows I don't like ginger. And then there was her. My sister-in-law sprawled on the armchair like she owned the place. She'd been staying with us for 3 weeks. 3 long weeks, her visits were always the same. Eat our food, take up our space, and somehow manage to complain about everything while contributing absolutely nothing. That afternoon, she was wearing those oversized headphones around her neck. Music faintly leaking out, scrolling through her phone with the kind of focus people usually reserve for defusing bombs. I tried to ignore her. It's the way you try to ignore a mosquito that keeps landing just out of swatting range. But I couldn't shake that smell. A moment later, my wife walked in carrying 2 cups of tea on a tray. 2. She set them down on the coffee table with that small. It's a polite smile she always does when company is around. "Here you go," she said, sliding 1 cup toward me and the other toward her sister. And that's when I noticed it. The steam from my cup carried that smell, the faint bitterness, the odd metallic note. I felt my brow crease.
Did you try a new tea?
I asked casually. She glanced at me for half a second, then looked away.
No, same as always, just a little extra flavor. A little extra flavor. What does that even mean?
The words stuck in my head like BURRS. My sister-in-law finally looked up from her phone, muttered a quick thanks, and grabbed her cup without even smelling it. She always drank tea too fast, gulping it down like it was watered ion. Other hand just stared at mine, and here's the thing. I'm not a paranoid person. I don't see conspiracies in my breakfast cereal. But that smell, it didn't belong there. Something in me, call it instinct, call it self-preservation, made me hesitate. And in that tiny pause, a thought slipped in, quiet but sharp. What if I just switched the cups? It wasn't like I thought my wife was trying to poison me, that's dramatic. But the idea rooted itself in my brain and refused to leave. And when I looked up, I saw that my sister-in-law was distracted again. Eyes glued to her phone, one hand idly stirring her tea. My wife had turned to adjust the curtains. It would be so easy, just a quick slide, across the table, and so I did. No. Big move, no suspicious glance. Just a casual nudge of my cup toward her, and hers toward me. My heart was beating faster than it should have been for something so stupid. She didn't even notice. She took her next sip without looking up. I leaned back into the couch, forcing myself to breathe like nothing happened. But in my chest I could feel it, that small ripple of adrenaline you get when you do something you know you weren't supposed to. And that was the exact moment the afternoon stopped feeling normal. Because deep down, knew. I'd just set something in motion I couldn't take back. I've never been the kind of person who pulls sneaky stunts. If something bothers me, I usually just deal with it. Either I let it go, or I confront it.
Oh.
No middle ground. But that smell. It had wormed its way into my brain. I kept glancing down at the cup on the table in front of me, steam curling up in thin ribbons, catching the light from the window. It looked normal enough. Golden brown liquid, smooth surface, not a single leaf out of place. But my nose kept telling me otherwise. It was like when you open a carton of milk and it looks fine, but something about the scent makes your stomach hesitate. I tried to ignore it. Really, I did. My sister-in-law was still in her own little world, chuckling at something on her phone. Every so often, she'd mutter a "oh my God" under her breath, probably reacting to some video that only she found funny. The tea sat in her other hand, cradled loosely, barely touched. My wife was sitting at the edge of the couch, scrolling through something on her own phone now, one leg crossed over the other. From the corner of my eye, I could see her watching. Her sister, not me. And that's when the thought popped in again. Just switch the cups. It was ridiculous. Petty, even. I mean, what was I going to say if anyone noticed? Sorry, I just thought yours looked tastier. But the feeling wouldn't go away. It wasn't even fear anymore. It was curiosity mixed with something else. I waited. For the right moment, the sister-in-law burst out laughing at something on her screen, tipping her head back just slightly. My wife, distracted by the noise, glanced over. My hand moved before my brain could second-guess it. It wasn't some dramatic movie scene. It's no slow motion, no intense music. Just a smooth, casual slide of my cup toward her and hers toward me. It felt like moving chess pieces, and yet my pulse was hammering in my ears. She didn't notice, not even a flicker. She kept laughing, put her phone down for a second, and wrapped her fingers around my cup. I sat back, trying to look natural, but inside it felt like I'd just stolen something valuable. I even caught myself glancing toward the kitchen, half expecting my wife to suddenly snap her head toward me and demand to know what I'd done. Nothing happened. For a few seconds, I actually considered swapping them back. You know, before anything real happened. But that would make it obvious. So I sat there, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the muted tick of the clock on the wall. My tea, or rather her tea now, sat untouched. In front of me, she took her first sip, without hesitation. And that's when I noticed something subtle. Her face didn't change much. No dramatic grimace, no coughing fit, but her eyes narrowed slightly like she'd just tasted something she couldn't place. Set the cup back down after only one sip. I caught my wife watching her, not openly. Just a quick, flicked glance. It could have been nothing, but to me, in that moment, it was everything. Not a fan, I asked lightly. She shrugged, brushing it off. Tastes a little weird, but whatever. Went back to small talk. Well, they did. I barely registered the words. My mind was in overdrive, dissecting every detail. Faint bitterness in the air, the way my wife's eyes had shifted, the way my sister-in-law had hesitated after that first sip. And beneath it all, my own heartbeat stubbornly refusing to calm down. You'd think a simple cup swap wouldn't feel like much. But in that moment, it felt like I'd stepped over a line. Not a huge one, but a line nonetheless. It was a small, quiet decision, but sometimes it's the smallest moves that change everything. She didn't even look at the cup before drinking, just lifted it, the way people do when they're not expecting anything except tea. I watched the rim touch her lips, a small inhale of steam, then a sip. It happened fast, the swallow, the pause, the faint shift in her eyebrows. Not a dramatic change. It's no wide-eyed shock or gagging, just a flicker. Like something in her brain had quietly filed the flavor under not quite right. She set the cup back down slowly, fingers still resting on the handle, and leaned back in her chair. Her lips pressed together, the kind of press people do when they're deciding whether or not to say something. But she'd instead, she glanced at her phone again, scrolling as though that strange taste hadn't just happened. I caught the movement from my wife, subtle, quick, but there. Her eyes shifted toward her sister, watching her face for the briefest moment. Then she looked back down at her own phone. Expression flat. It wasn't a look of concern. It wasn't a look of satisfaction either. It's unreadable. That neutrality made it worse, because now my brain was running laps. Okay, maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's just a weird batch of tea. Maybe she used the last leaves in the tin and they were stale. But then another voice. Or maybe it's not the tea at all. Maybe there's something in it, something that was meant for you. The idea slid into my thoughts without permission. And once it was there, it dug in deep. The sound of the clock ticking from the wall suddenly seemed too loud. The faint hum of the fridge felt amplified. Every tiny sound was filling the space between us like static. I took my own cup, now hers, and held it between my palms. Pretending to be casual, the steam rose up, carrying nothing but the familiar, comforting smell I was used to. It should have calmed me down. It didn't. Because here's the thing. I couldn't stop thinking about her expression. That small frown she'd tried to smooth over. The way she hadn't taken another sip yet. I found myself studying her. The angle of her shoulders. The way her fingers tapped lightly on the phone screen, like she was keeping herself distracted. And my wife still quiet, still neutral, not looking at me at all. I wanted to ask God. I wanted to say something. But how do you do that without sounding insane? Hey, did you put something in the tea? Yeah. That would go over well. So instead, I sat there, doing what people do when they're trying not to draw attention. I sipped my tea. The normal tea. The tea that should have been hers. It tasted fine, just as it always did. Smooth. Slightly. Sweet. Familiar. Which only made the gap between our experiences bigger. She didn't touch her cup again for a full 5 minutes. 5 long. Crawling minutes where the air in the room felt heavier. And in that space, my mind went from curiosity to suspicion, to something close to fear. Because sometimes it's not about what people say. It's about the silence that follows. It's strange how your mind will suddenly drag up something you'd forgotten, or thought you'd forgotten, at the exact moment you wish it wouldn't. As I sat there watching her push the tea further away from her side of the coffee table, a memory crept in. One I hadn't thought about in days. It was last week. A Tuesday night, I think. I'd been upstairs in our bedroom, finishing some emails before bed. The TV downstairs was on low, murmuring like background noise, and then I heard voices, not loud, not shouting, just sharp. The kind of sharpness that makes you pause what you're doing without even realizing it. I got up and wandered halfway down the stairs, stopping just before the last step. They were in the kitchen. My wife and her sister. The sink was running. The steady splash of water hitting metal, but underneath it I caught bits and pieces. You can't keep. Already told you. Enough is enough. I'll handle it. That last part stuck with me. I'll handle it. It wasn't the words themselves that unsettled me. It was the tone, firm, low, like a decision. Had already been made and all that was left was to follow through. I'd stood there for maybe a minute, trying to piece together the fragments between the sound of clinking dishes and the water running. But every time I thought I had context, another splash or cupboard slam erased it. Eventually, I just walked back upstairs. At the time, I told myself it was just them being, well, them sisters. They've always had a complicated relationship. Moments of laughter, moments of snapping at each other over nothing. I'd seen it before. I remember lying in bed that night thinking, it's none of my business. And now, sitting here in the living room with that untouched cup of tea between us, those words echoed in my head with a different weight. I'll handle it. What did that mean? Handle what exactly? I glanced at my wife now, her face calm but unreadable as she tapped something into her phone. The same hands that had carried those cups in earlier. The same hands that, just a week ago, had been clinking dishes in the kitchen while saying those words. My sister-in-law shifted in her chair, leaning forward to rest her elbows on her knees. She still hadn't picked the cup back up, sat there, steam thinning into the air. It was ridiculous. I told myself, you can't connect an overheard argument from a week ago to the smell of tea today. People argue. That's life. But try telling that. It's the little knot forming in my stomach. Because here's the thing. Once you've heard something you weren't meant to hear, it never really goes away. It just sits there quietly, waiting for the right moment to come back. And when it does, it's never gentle. I sat back into the couch trying to focus on the TV. I couldn't tell you what was playing. All I could hear, in a loop, was that phrase, "I'll handle it." And in that moment, it didn't feel like she'd been talking about a petty, sisterly squabble. It felt like she'd been talking about a problem, and problems can be handled in a lot of ways. It happened so quickly, I almost missed the moment it shifted. 1 second, my sister-in-law was leaning forward, elbows on her knees, scrolling through her phone. The next, she froze, like her body had just remembered something it forgot to tell her brain. Her eyes blinked a little slower. She rubbed her temple. "You okay?" my wife asked casually, but her voice carried that extra note, the one people use when they're pretending not to be too interested. "Yeah, just..." She let out a short, uneven laugh. "Just feel a little lightheaded." She stood up, but it wasn't the smooth, deliberate kind of standing. It was more like her legs had taken a vote and were 50-50 on whether they were going to hold her weight. I watched her steady herself against the arm of the chair before heading toward the hallway. "Bathroom," she muttered. "Right back." The sound of her footsteps faded down the hall, followed by the distinct click of the bathroom door locking. And just like that, the house went still. I sat there with my cup of tea, the good tea, the one that had been meant for me, untouched in front of me. Steam still curled up from the surface, but my appetite for it had vanished. Across from me, my wife stayed seated. She didn't get up to check on her sister. She didn't even glance toward the hallway. She just sat there, legs crossed, hands folded loosely in her lap, face perfectly still. If stillness could be staged, this was it. And it wasn't the relaxed kind of stillness either. This was the kind you see in animals right before they pounce, the gathering of energy, quiet watching. The ticking clock on the wall was suddenly loud again. Tick, 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 tick. Neither of us spoke. I wanted to ask something, anything. To break the tension, "Do you think she's okay? Or maybe she should lie down." But my mouth wouldn't cooperate. It felt like speaking would be the same as accusing. Instead, I just sat there, my hand wrapped around the warm ceramic of the cup, not drinking, not setting it down. My thumb traced the rim absent-mindedly. My wife's gaze flicked down at my cup, then back up at me. The whole exchange took maybe a second, but it sent a jolt straight through me. I couldn't tell if she was checking to see if I'd drunk it, or confirming that I hadn't. From the hallway, I heard the faint sound of water running in the bathroom. It's not constant, just in short bursts, like she was splashing her face. My wife finally shifted, leaning back into the couch. "Fine," she said, her tone flat. "She's probably just tired. Long week." I nodded, like I agreed. But my pulse was thudding in my ears. Because here's the thing. People don't lock the bathroom door if they're just tired. And my wife? My wife wasn't even pretending to be concerned. The water in the bathroom stopped running. Silence swallowed the hallway. I stayed seated, staring at some meaningless spot on the coffee table, a small ring where a mug had once rested. My fingers tapped the cup in front of me, a quiet, steady rhythm like I was keeping time with my own nerves. When I finally looked up, her eyes were already on me. Not wide, not angry, just sharp, focused. The way someone looks when they're trying to read you without letting you know you're being read. I shifted in my seat. She did. It was like we were playing a game we hadn't agreed to start. A staring contest disguised as casual glances. I tried to make my face neutral, that bland. Everything's fine expression you give cashiers when they tell you to have a nice day. But my mouth felt dry. "Tea's getting cold," she said, eventually her voice even. "Yeah," I muttered. "I'll drink it in a bit." Another glance, quick, but I caught it, down at the cup, then back to my face. I wondered if she could hear the ticking clock as loudly as I could. It wasn't just ticking anymore. It was cutting the silence into pieces. Tick, tick, tick. From the bathroom came the faint sound of movement, a cabinet opening, the squeak of hinges. Then a soft thud as it closed again. My wife crossed one leg over the other, leaning back slightly, but there was nothing relaxed about it. Her fingers drummed lightly on her knee, not in boredom, but in thought. I felt her eyes sweep over me again. "You look tense," she said. I forced a small laugh. Just tired. She nodded once, slow, not like she believed me. More like she'd filed the answer away in some private mental folder. It was maddening.
Nice.
The way neither of us would say the thing that was hanging between us. Because what was? I suppose to say, "Hey, why does your tea smell like something that could knock a horse out?" Or worse, "Why did you watch your sister drink it like you were waiting for a reaction?" The bathroom door clicked open, footsteps back toward the living room. My sister-in-law reappeared, face slightly pale, but with that stubborn, "I'm fine" look people get when they don't want to make a big deal. She avoided eye contact, went straight for the armchair, and sat down without touching her tea again. The air was heavier now, and I wasn't sure if it was because of her, because of what my wife and I had silently exchanged in her absence. We kept talking about nothing, or rather, pretending to. But underneath it, every look, every pause, every sip of breath felt like its own quiet accusation. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't even a conversation, but it was definitely a confrontation. One without words. That evening after dinner, the house had gone quiet, too quiet. My sister-in-law had gone to bed early, claiming she still felt a little off. My wife was in the bedroom, folding laundry and watching one of those true crime shows. She likes the kind with dramatic music and slow zooms on evidence bags. I wandered into the kitchen under the pretense of grabbing a glass of water. The overhead light flickered slightly, giving the room that washed-out late-night stillness. The sink was empty, counters wiped clean. The faint smell of dish soap lingered in the air. I opened the fridge, stared inside like I was going to find answers in between the leftover curry and a jar of pickles. I closed it again. That's when I noticed the trash. It wasn't overflowing. But something at the top caught my eye, a crumpled foil packet, wedged between an empty yogurt cup and a damp paper towel. I pulled it out, smoothing it between my fingers. No brand name I recognized. Just a bland green and white design with words printed in small, tidy letters. Herbal relaxant blend. Herbal, sure. Except halfway down, under the list of dried flowers and roots, was an ingredient I couldn't pronounce. It looked more like something from a chemistry textbook than a tea box. I frowned, holding the packet closer under the light. It wasn't even fully empty. There was still some powder clinging to the corners. Something about it prickled at the back of my neck. I grabbed my phone from the counter and typed the ingredient into a search bar. It took less than 10 seconds for the results to load, and when they did, my stomach dropped. It wasn't illegal, but it wasn't exactly casual. The first link was a medical site explaining its effects, a potent sedative used in small doses to induce sleep or deep relaxation. Can cause dizziness, nausea, and in higher concentrations, temporary unconsciousness. Not exactly something you'd toss into tea for fun. My thumb hovered over the screen, scrolling slowly. Words like drowsiness, loss of coordination, confusion blinked back at me in bullet points. I looked back at the packet in my hand, my fingers tightening around it. Panic came first. That cold, creeping kind that starts in your chest and spreads out to your limbs. Then came something worse. Betrayal. Because if my wife had bought this, if she had used it, that meant there was intent. You don't just accidentally slip a sedative into someone's cup. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. I dropped the packet back into the trash and stood there for a moment, staring at the floor like it might tell me what to do next. I could hear the faint sound of the TV from the bedroom, a narrator talking about the suspects. Timeline in that slow, deliberate voice. My wife's laugh followed a moment later, light unbothered. I stood there listening, the packet still sitting in the bin behind me, like a silent witness, and for the first time that day I realized I might not actually want the answer to the question in my head. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, watching faint shadows from the streetlight outside shift and stretch across the plaster. The clock on my nightstand glowed 1:47 a.m. in pale green numbers, each minute dragging past like it was moving through water. Beside me, my wife's breathing was steady to steady. It had that deliberate rhythm that made me wonder if she was actually asleep or just pretending. Then quietly she shifted. The bed dipped as she swung her legs over the side. The soft pad of her feet against the carpet. She didn't turn on the light. I closed my eyes just enough to make it look like I was out cold, left a sliver so I could watch her silhouette slip out of the room. A moment later, I heard the faintest creak of the floorboards down the hall, followed by the sound of the living room door easing shut. I waited. 10 seconds. Maybe 20. Then I got up. The hallway was dark, lit only by the dim glow from the street outside. I moved slow. Each step a careful negotiation with the floor to keep it quiet. I stopped just before the doorway. The living room was faintly lit. By her phone screen, she was facing the window, her back to me. Her voice was low, a half-whisper. I could barely make out the words at first. Yeah, she drank it. Shh. My chest tightened. No, she's fine, just tired. Yeah, it's done. The words hung there, heavy. She paused, listening to whoever was on the other end. My mind was already stitching together pieces I didn't want to see lined up in the same picture. The smell and the tea, the switch, her sister's sudden dizziness, the packet in the trash. I told you I'd handle it, she said finally. Then she ended the call. Silence filled the room. She stood there for a few moments longer, still facing the window. I couldn't see her face, but the way her shoulders were set, not relaxed, not tense, just fixed, made me think she wasn't entirely done with whatever she'd started. I backed away before she could turn around, slipping into bed and pulling the covers up. My pulse was still pounding in my ears when I heard her footsteps return. Down the hall, the mattress dipped as she climbed back in. Her breathing resumed that same, steady rhythm, but I didn't close my eyes for the rest of the night, because now I knew she had planned something. I just didn't know what, or who it was really meant for. Morning came slow. I'd been awake long before the sun even thought about showing up, lying there with my eyes fixed on the ceiling, feeling like my own house had turned into a crime scene. The smell of coffee drifted in from the kitchen, not tea, not today, and that alone told me she was trying to keep things normal, or at least look like it. I walked in and she was at the stove, hair tied back, wearing that old gray sweatshirt she's had since college. She turned when she heard me, a faint smile on her face. "You're up early," she said, like last night. Hadn't happened. I leaned against the counter, watching her pour coffee into 2 mugs. I waited until she put them down before speaking. "I heard you last night," I said. The sound of the refrigerator hum filled the silence that followed. She didn't ask what I heard. She didn't pretend she didn't know what I was talking about. She just sighed and pulled out a chair at the kitchen table. "Okay," she said, motioning for me to sit. "Before you start, let me explain." I stayed standing. Her fingers tapped against the mug for a moment before she spoke. "It wasn't for you, it was for her." I blinked. My sister," she said, like it should have been obvious. I couldn't take it anymore. The constant comments, the late-night calls in the middle of our dinners. The way she acts like this is her house. I just wanted a few hours. It's just to breathe. I stared at her, trying to process the sheer casualness of her confession. "You drugged her," I said flatly. "It's not like I poisoned her," she snapped, then immediately softened her tone. "It's just a sedative. Harmless. She'd sleep it off, wake up, maybe finally stop hovering over me for a while." I couldn't help the small, disbelieving laugh that escaped me. "You didn't tell me because," she shrugged, eyes darting away, "because you'd overreact, and there it was. Like this whole thing was just a minor inconvenience I'd eventually get over." She took a sip of her coffee and glanced up at me. "Look, I'm sorry if it freaked you out. I needed peace, and she never leaves." I didn't know what else to do. Belief wasn't the word for what I felt. Not exactly. It was something smaller, sharper, like that moment when you find out the gun wasn't loaded, but you still had it pointed at you for a solid minute. I was glad it hadn't been me. But now I was stuck with the knowledge that my wife was capable of this, of looking me in the eye, offering me tea, and keeping that secret in her back pocket. Somewhere in the living room, her sister's voice rang out, muffled but awake, like nothing had happened. I looked back at my wife. She met my gaze with a quiet steadiness, almost daring me to make it a bigger deal than she thought it was. And I realized maybe she was right. Maybe I would overreact, because I couldn't stop wondering what would have happened if I hadn't. Switch the cups. It's strange how you can live with someone for years, thinking you know the entire map of them, every road, every shortcut, every dead end. And then one day, you stumble across a dark alley you didn't know existed. It wasn't the tea. It wasn't even the fact that she'd slipped something into it. It was that she'd looked me in the eye, smiled, and let me drink it. If I hadn't switched the cups, and sure, she swears it wasn't meant for me, says it like that's supposed to make it better. Like intent erases the fact that she kept it from me at all. People think trust breaks like a plate, one big shatter. Loud and obvious, but it doesn't. It's quieter than that. It starts with a hairline fracture you can't see, then another, and another. Until one day, you're holding something that looks whole. But it'll crumble if you so much as breathe wrong. The rest of that day went on like nothing happened. We ate lunch together. We laughed at something on TV. Her sister eventually left to stay with a friend for a couple of days. From the outside, it probably looked like a normal afternoon, but inside, I was clocking every word, every glance, every silence. Because once you've seen that alley, once you've realized there are corners of someone you'll never fully. No, you can't unsee it. That night when I went into the kitchen to grab some water, I saw it. The tea still sitting there on the counter. The one she made for me cold, forgotten.